And we're live. It is Thursday, July 23rd, 11 a.m. Pacific, and this is DB Hangops. My name is Jeffrey Anderson, and today we're going to be talking about information security and you, specifically with MySQL and database kind of goodies. So before we dive in, why don't we do a quick round of introductions. I'm Jeffrey Anderson. I'm a DBA at Box. Morgan.
Morgan Tucker, MySQL Community Manager at Oracle.
Okay, Phil.
Phil Hildebrand, I'm a DBA at Moz.
Okay, Pip.
My name is Pim Vanderwall. I'm a DBA at Acquia.
And Shlomi.
Hi, I'm Shlomi. I'm engineer at Booking.com.
Okay. Oh, and Daniel just joined, so you want to introduce yourself real quick, Daniel?
This is Daniel, DBA at Booking.com.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, it's meant to be very open-ended today. I have a few kind of talking points we can work through. But I think the first one I wanted to ask is just for anyone who is well, I also want to hear your take on this too, Morgan. But when it comes to managing a database infrastructure, MySQL or whatever, what have you, what does security mean for you as just a kind of high-level question? Everyone's just looking up, thinking about it, like maybe.
So security is, like every good engineer, I hate security, right? But security means you have full visibility into what happens where, when, optionally why. You can flip the flag on that, and for me, this is mostly like visibility, like audit everything that relates to logins, actions, etc. And you can control everything.
I would say controlling the access, making sure that pretty much nobody can get to any potentially vulnerable parts of your infrastructure. If they can't get to it, then it's impossible to break in and exploit the vulnerabilities. So it's all about minimizing that.
Yeah, and I think it's also being able to trust that any changes that happen are changes that we planned or didn't plan but were initiated by us. So that no one outside of Moz or outside of our company can initiate any changes in our system without us understanding it and why.
I'd love to hear your take on this, Morgan.
Yeah, I think I would probably go with a definition similar to Pim's. I think it's about the controlled access to resources. Although I've started to really, in my thinking pattern, differentiate between security and standards and what you have to do to achieve those. And I notice you've got both on the agenda for today.
Yep. Oh, hi, Jenny.
Hey there.
Do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Oh, sure. I'm Jenny Snyder. I'm a MySQL DBA at Yelp, and I'll try and figure out how to have that cool two-bar introduction going on in just a second.
Okay.
Susanna's also going to be joining me in a moment.
Perfect. And just to bring you up to speed, we were just posed the initial question of what does security mean to you? And so far we have the high-level commentary so far has been visibility, being able to see what happened, when it happened, where it happened, and controlling access to resources in your backend and being able to identify what access has happened.
Yeah, I think those are topics that are really interesting to us, and I'm sure they're also, the upgrade path for MySQL is also probably something very interesting, since all the, I'm sure everyone got the alerts yesterday that it's time to upgrade certain versions of MySQL 5.5.
Oh, we can talk about that today. All right.
5.6 as well. The advisory was for both.
Okay, and Suzanne's here. Suzanne, if you want to introduce yourself real quick.
Hi. Okay, sorry, it was a bit confusing here, the whole setup. I'm Susanna. I'm a DBA at Yelp, working together with Jenny and Matt, who might you know as well. And yeah, I'm very interested in the security topics that you wanted to talk about today.
Okay. All right, so yeah, so now that we have kind of like this base definition of what we feel security is, having visibility into what's happening and kind of the full stack of where it happened, what happened, being able to manage access. And I guess we're also going to talk about, it sounds like some CVEs might have been published in the past day or two for MySQL 5.5 and 5.6. Morgan is just laughing as I say this, so we know it's going to be very funny. But yeah, so why don't we start?
I haven't looked at it. I'll be honest, I'm a little bit blindsided. Maybe I should check.
But so why don't we just kind of start diving into, so we have like this high-level definition of what we feel security is. And I guess what I'm really interested to hear is for each person here, or just at a high level at your place of work, what kind of tools do you use? Are there any particular settings that you look at in MySQL? And so I want to kind of start at like high level bird's eye view, and we'll kind of drill down as we see fit and let the discussion go organically. And I guess I can start and just say, the big one is, we talked about having all this access, being able to track it, and so things like tool-wise, it's and settings-wise, it's making sure you have certain things enabled in your log files. Sudo, everyone use sudo for everything, so that you have everything tracked in the log in the sudoers log file, and you can manage all the access through the sudoers file itself. And actually, that's like a fun process we have here. Like, you are not allowed to use su at all. Every command you do, you have to use sudo, and you can't sudo into a root shell. That's also disallowed. So we have monitors to watch for that as well. So on the host level, we have confidence that we are able to track everything that's happening and when it's happening, and all that stuff in our case gets aggregated into I think Splunk right now, and alerts are driven off of that for any violations or exceptions that happen. And the reason for all this is because, at least for us, we also have to adhere to some compliance standards like payment card industry, ISO 27000, and a couple other ones that my compliance team knows way more about than I do. I just have to answer questions on their spreadsheets about, do we have this information? So I'd love to hear for other folks, like, common tools or easy toolkits you might use or common settings you might have.
Well, I use the tools from Center for Internet Security often. I didn't use them at Booking yet. And that's also something I work on. Those are basically a security benchmark, which checks how well something is secured, which you can do for MySQL, but they also have benchmarks for things like Red Hat. And it's just to make a secure baseline. And they have tools to automate that also. So that's something I'm involved with.
Sorry, that was the Nessus toolkit, right, that you're talking about, Daniel?
No, it's a Center for Internet Security, which publishes some benchmarks, and there's also a tool.
Gotcha. Well, that kind of leads into, we were using the Nessus toolkit, which I think is based on that benchmark, and I actually saw some of your work on those benchmarks as well, which we've been looking to incorporate. We need to use those to actually prove our compliance with security standards, so kind of get it handed down from higher up that we need to run those benchmarks. But to be honest, for me, they're just for compliance rather than for actual security. So far, I haven't found they improve security by that much, because it's really hard for a tool like that to actually do proper testing of your infrastructure.
Yeah, and the main aim is to make it easy for people to test security for something they're not that familiar with. So if you're MySQL DBA, then I don't expect anyone to find anything, but there might be surprises.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I said one of the funny side notes there is that when we started to use Nessus, one of the things we ran into is the fact that it doesn't deal with tunnels. So, we tunnel into servers, and the first request was, can you open up access so we can do our scanning? Which always made me laugh.
First layer of security, done.
Exactly.
But yeah, I was going to say, we also have Nessus running. It was something our security team put together, and And it touches a whole bunch of things. And database. That's why it came up for us was we need to give it some servers they can point at, and let them kind of run their thing. And I can't remember some of the other stuff that's running, because this is one of those things, like we have a whole security team whose like focus is just finding all this stuff, breaking in, doing war games and what have you. And also things like having external groups come in and try to break into your site and find ways to get at the data. And that's the thing is, fundamentally, it's all about the layers of security, and you have access control at multiple points, multiple things that you have to get through, to get access, to get elevated access, and then on top of that, then it's a matter of like, so you have all these in place. Is there something simpler though? Like, could you get away with doing a SQL injection or something to get at data? And I think that's one of those. As a DBA, you're like, people will ask you like, well, how do you protect against a SQL injection? And if it's a small app you wrote, well, you just fix it, or you use real escape string or something. But if it's like a large stack application, from your perspective, you're like, well, there's so much data. How do I know if there's an injection? Maybe if someone does a stupid injection and tries to dump the whole data set, it'll cause a performance degradation. We'll find it. But that's something I'm actually curious, like for other folks as well. Like, is SQL injection something that you consciously think about regularly at your company? Does it go away as the size grows? Things like that.
So we have a pretty sizable security team now here at Yelp, and part of what happens is they file tickets against us. We have a lot of internal scanning, but that's one of the benefits of having an ORM is that it removes a lot of the avenues for SQL injection attacks. I know that can be a touchy subject for a lot of people, but the majority of ways that our DBA team interfaces with security today is that when we do get, we have all of our the CVE notices for Ubuntu Trusty on which we run now create tickets automatically for us in Jira. And it's actually upgrading MySQL. That's the largest path that we go through for security issues these days. We also have automatic managing of our user grants for MySQL, and
did Jenny just freeze for anyone else?
Yeah.
Darn.
So I'm going to just echo what Jenny said, because it applies very similarly. In our case, upgrading MySQL is like a necessity. We just have to upgrade MySQL all the time. Obviously when there's a security threat, but even without, so that's a pretty large operation with the number of servers we have. That's one thing. And ORMs, or it could be a thin layer, abstraction layer, or just prepared statements. They're pretty good at solving. Well, just using prepared statements solves a lot of SQL injection problems, right? Like escaping, etc. So that's pretty obvious. Yeah. Otherwise, what Jenny said. Oh, and user management, like automated user management. Everything is chef puppetized. You create new roles, all that stuff. So that's actually a big pain for us, because we have so many different replication topology chains, so many different masters and so many different modules to the application. When we each one gets its own user and its own set of hosts from where it might connect, etc. And so it's like M by N, right? It's like there's probably thousands and thousands, if not tens of thousands, of different credentials with passwords across our company. That's really a pain to manage. Even though it's automated, it's a pain to create, it's a pain to review. It's just too much of it.
Okay, hey, go ahead.
Oh, I think that's one of the issues we have at Moz. And we're sort of in the just growing into security mode. So, initially we were just keep the network secure and make sure everybody knows internally that they're responsible for what they do. And so it was kind of give people access to what they're responsible for, and they're responsible for anything that happens there. And so we have we use Encapsula as a paid service it's a DDoS prevention service, but they look for things like SQL injection in traffic and sort of the basic signatures. So we get a little bit on that side, and then internally, we do it kind of by group access to a database server, and only those that need access get SSH keys on there. Typically, that's only people that might be doing database changes, and then with the user management, that's a pain for us too. So it used to be just by group, right? Here's your team's group user, which isn't the greatest. And so now we've moved to every dev that needs to have access has a user. A lot of the BI team have user accounts, and so that's we use Capistrano, very basic stuff. But we're looking into writing a tool or something ourselves, where we can store it, automatically push it out, and then also store SSH keys in there too, because that's one of the other things that we're just coming around to having to deal with. And we don't actually have a security team here, so it is a little more on us and our responsibility until, But I'm very interested in some of the tools that you mentioned, because maybe I can pick back up those.
So, do you use SSH to secure the connection for the developers, or do you use SSL with MySQL?
So if a dev's connecting, it's usually SSH, and then they connect locally. So we do have a little security from that standpoint, right? You want to connect, you connect locally, or in some cases for like the BI team, we'll allow access just from our subnet that they're DHCP for their laptops. So we do some of the where are you coming from on the MySQL side.
So that was actually a question I wanted to ask other folks here is when you have all of your user management that you put together, so in MySQL, when you grant access to any resource in the system, it's always user at and then some host. And so you can do % for matching anything on that host level thing, and that's provided there's not something that's more specific that'll match first. And so I'm curious, do folks actually put some sort of IP range, subnet, wildcard, or do they just do % kind of at a high level and say, like, we don't really need the database to think about it?
Yeah, can I go first on that one? I don't use it, and I wonder I'm going to get shut down for that. But I don't think it's anywhere near as powerful as a firewall. And it's kind of double configuration that you end up with, where anytime you have double configuration, it's just harder to debug when you have problems where someone's being refused. So I don't honestly rather not have it. I just use wildcard, and maybe some security person inside will shoot me down for that.
Yeah, I think at Moz we use it because we don't have firewalls between the database and our app servers, so they kind of secure from the outside. And that was sort of legacy thing, right? I imagine at some point, hopefully, we'll have those. So we do it on the database, and it is a pain. If they change VPN connections, which we've done a couple times, we've got to change all that stuff. And understanding the DHCP range they hand out, we have multiple data centers, so you have to take that into account. So it is a pain, but it's how we deal with it.
Yeah, and Daniel's pointing to a bug saying that MySQL's hostname portion doesn't accept a CIDR. We actually just recently changed the authentication to be 32 characters for a username rather than 16. And it was an interesting project because speaking to the developer on it, he was really not in favor of increasing it by much, because the way that the matching works, it's a complicated-ish algorithm. It's a mask, and having to match this precedence system makes it a lot more complicated. I honestly think it's an anti-feature. But I'll let others speak now.
Yeah, well, the host-specific part, I also used that to have a per application server account once, where we needed some more security, and we needed to be able to just make sure that one application server could not connect anymore. And there it was quite useful because all the usernames were identical on all the application servers. The difference was in the IP address. But mostly it's not that really useful, and it creates a lot of confusion.
So
go ahead.
So we kind of treat it as like to use the right tool for the job. We prefer to use firewalls and our networking security to really be the last line of defense. Our usernames that we dictate are either % or 10% in all situations. We do have specific application users for every specific application or service within our infrastructure, and for individuals who need specific access, it's not SSH, but it's actual grants within the database. People who are authorized to make changes to the schema have their own users, and we've actually removed a lot of the complexity from our security policy by actually removing production access for the majority of our developers, and instead providing a development system that has a truly representative set of data available to them from which all PII and sensitive data has been scrubbed. So, a huge part of it, I think, is just looking at who truly needs this access and ratcheting down that as much as possible.
Yeah, and we had a similar thing too when we put in our user management in place, and taking kind of the mess of grants that had grown over time from just doing extra backup copies between servers and what have you. And even my favorite is on a fresh MySQL installation, you always have a grant for a user at the host that it was installed on. And so we had host names like DB 2000 or something on some other machine that had a completely different host name, because they were copied from one another at some point in time. And so just kind of going through and cleaning all that out on the first pass, getting this management kind of deployed.
I'm pretty sure that's gone in 5.7, by the way.
Thank goodness. But yeah, I wanted to just kind of echo what Jenny had said. Very similar for us, like for the most part, it's % or 10%, just kind of we don't really care about where they're coming from. I think the only time I've done an explicit IP-based grant was because we had some issue in our dev environment where something was exploding and we couldn't get a hold of the person to stop it. So we kind of put together a very specific grant to kill their access effectively. But things like that are more obviated by being able to rotate your accounts easily and have potentially another layer in front of your database tier. And similar to what Jenny had said too, removing as much of the unnecessary access as possible, and granting it either provisionally for certain work that needs to be done, or having a separate environment where it's allowed to go. And so in our case, we don't have a system that auto scrubs the data, but we do have a developer-specific copy of our data set that goes through a MySQL proxy so that every statement that goes through it is logged. So we can see all of the data access and transmission that happens. And so that goes back to the original thing of having the visibility. Like, the system's there. We want to empower our developers to be able to just do the work and do the debugging on their own without us having to sit there and push a button constantly. So it's better to just log it all and then have a system that'll periodically scan through those to make sure there's no violations or exceptions happening.
So there was a question from the Slack. Jeff, someone was asking, how do you rotate credentials? So when it's time, because everyone's got automatic password rotation, right? How about you tell me how you do your credential rotation, then I'll go.
So credential rotation for us is on some interval, based on compliance standards, accounts need to change, right? That's how it works. And so typically we deploy a new copy of an account. So we have, let's say, app_read-only. It might be the username. It's app read-only 1, and then we deploy a read-only 2. Let that bake for a day, or we'll get that out. So take maybe 2 hours to get completely propagated without forcing it, and then update config, for all of our applications to use the new account, and then we check our monitoring system where we have the user statistics data being collected from MySQL, and so we can see are there still connections on the old account, and if it's one of those, like, when it's under an acceptable threshold where, like, those lingering connections on the old account are like machines that are really something might be wrong. It's like, on the order of 10 or less. At that point, we'll just kill the old account and let that go away. And I kind of think that's kind of the standard. You can't just, like, change password on an active account that is used to authenticate, hundreds, thousands of times a second. Like, that's not happy.
Yep, because nothing's truly atomic, right? I think that's what we would use if we were just, if we actually did do more password rotation. And I think, for people who find that really difficult, I think maybe the step to get there is first you need to have a single configuration for these users and an automated method for deploying it out. We're now there so that if we wanted to create a new user and change the way that our application connects to the database, it would be very simple. But we definitely weren't there 2 years ago.
Yeah, I think that's what we've done in the past too, and we have an automated way to push out users. But what's difficult for us is, I think you talked about it, but was getting that coordinated with when the development team updates the application configs. So I think what we want to have long term is some kind of API in front of that, so that the dev, when they push it, it can push out the new user or whatever. That may cause more security issues than it helps, but
just
a timing right is difficult.
Small feature request. I like the point Jenny raised about changing credentials is not atomic. I don't know which bug number it is, but I saw there was a request that every user, if they could have exactly 2 passwords, then you could do a rolling credential change.
I completely disagree that anyone should have to implement that.
That's so weird.
Then when it's N+2, well, fuck,
No,
I really need 3 passwords, guys.
If the MySQL server implemented that, so that you could have 2 passwords for a user, you could do a rolling rotation of credentials.
I think instead we need to think about it is that everyone should be doing rolling releases of their code deployments, and the idea is that everything is done as an incremental, roll forward, roll back safe change. So that's the same way we make our schema changes. Everything is an additive change. So you can make things happen way in advance. Create a new database user far in advance of a configuration change that might use the new user or need to be rolled back. And then later dropping the user. I think we just kind of need to get into that mindset first.
Daniel says he can do it with authentication plugins. Okay, I haven't tried that.
Yeah, so speaking of plugins, so Jeff, you talked about using something that sounded like a proxy for auditing database usage. Is everyone using the audit plugin to track user access of data?
It seems like no across the board, unless you want me to chime in.
No, yeah. So before we were using 5.6, well, in my previous company at Outbrain, so I wrote a simple audit plugin, and yes, we were using it a lot, and we actually got very, very good results. Any access, who's the user, timestamp, where did they connect from, and whether the connection was successful or rejected. And we happened to find a lot of, just wrong Nagios passwords or stuff like that that would just hammer in our databases with wrong credentials. Or we would find like this developer who was hacking around some mini project of his, and he would just hammer a specific slave or the master like at 100 connections per second just from using.
Did Shlomi lock up for anyone else?
Yeah.
Darn. Hangout's being really tough today.
So I think that, so we kind of don't, we actually really limit the way that people can connect to the database. So I guess some of those problems just kind of don't happen. Like we wouldn't allow new
There I
people
am.
to connect.
There I am.
Oh.
I'm back. Yes. So we would use the audit plugin on any MySQL server, log stash to them, and send them to Kibana where it would be visible to anyone what's going on in our service. So we really got a lot of good input. Like from day one we implemented this, we killed some like 20 unnecessary or evil connection sources to our databases. Yeah, it's worthwhile doing it.
So something that was mentioned in the chat room on the Hangout here was who has log_warning set to 2 on their MySQL servers? Oh, a lot of shaking heads. Okay, oh, good.
Can we just, for the class, can we just remind people what that means?
That's what I was going to. So log warnings 2, obviously, you can increase the error logging set, but log warning set to 2 specifically will also show failed connections or invalid connections to your server. So if someone uses a bad password, it'll get logged into the MySQL error log. Yeah. Unfortunately, it will also spew a mountain of unsafe for replication statements, which is why most people may not turn it on because their application does things that are a little dicey. And so at least for us, the version of Percona we're running 5.5.30 something, and the newer one with 5.6 something, they actually added an extra config option to specifically ignore the replication noise warnings so that the log file is still nice and succinct.
Okay, so you've got log warnings set to 2, but you've also got that like log warnings ignore 1592 set.
Yeah, let me pull it up real quick.
Yeah, we usually turn it on and turn it off if we think there's an issue.
Because it's that verbose. Interesting.
So we don't run it all the time.
Yeah. The other one it has, Jeff, is connection disconnects, like aborts. I don't know if that's mentioned. It gets more complicated in 5.7.2. It's renamed to log error verbosity. And there's 3 values now, 1, 2, and 3. 2 the default, I think.
I think that would be something that we'd be interested in using if we had more robots looking at our error log and less humans. Right now, we don't have our MySQL error logs into ELK or Elastic Logstash and Kibana, but I think that when we do, that would be something really neat to have because we do get questions about aborted clients quite frequently. We're just not there yet.
Yeah, and that's exactly why we have this set up. And so this was it was log warning suppress, which was put in Percona 5.5, and the values are empty string or 1592, specifically to suppress error 1592, which is that noisy replication alert. And so yeah, we're running that, and we have all of our MySQL logs being ingested into Splunk, since now the volume is actually pretty low after we were able to suppress that warning. And so we have Splunk alerts set up, so if there's invalid connections or bad passwords, it'll fire an email. And so it's one of those things like we know very quickly if we have a bad actor in the system or if someone is fat fingering their password a lot. So those are the two kind of great extremes there. But the other nice thing is, we can have this fire straight to our security team, and they can actually take action on it before we even need to really start thinking about it. Because for us, it's like, okay, there's a bad password happening or an aborted client maybe. But that's something that your security team, if you have one, might be a lot more interested in than you are. So Morgan, I wanted to ask, and you might have said it when I was pulling up this link, but is there a similar? I mean, suppressing error 1592 is like, you know, but is there a similar way to get this out of Oracle standard 5657?
I'm not sure. It's a reasonable request. I know that prior to 5.7, there's no standard like logging API inside the server. So being able to filter, they're basically like printfs. There's no functionality to hack that in. So that was all changed in 5.7 so that it uses a standard API and it's aware of the subsection that raised the error. So adding filters is easy, but I don't know if it exists.
Okay, so that actually sounds kind of cool. I mean, are the filters just defined in your my.cnf as a parameter?
I don't know if there's any specific options for filters, but why I know of this is that the actual error log format with even like the date was inconsistent prior to 5.7, where there could be like 3 different versions of the date. Now it uses the standard date format that every other log provider uses, and then the thread ID of what inside did it, and then the message, right? It's a consistent API internally with a consistent message. It's actually a really amazing feature for operationalization. I don't know how you put that on a slide there to say that. It should have been like that a while ago.
So another question that was brought up before we kind of start shifting into another direction, I think. So how many folks here use some sort of secret management tool, like a password vault or something, to hold their account information? If you're allowed to say, is another caveat I should put there, I guess. And if you do, what do you use?
Well, we've tried a couple different things, and that's why I mentioned we're looking at building one that does more what we want it to do. So.
Okay, so I guess for most people, it's super secure lockdown config file of safe.
We restrict access to our Puppet repo.
There you go. Yeah, 2-factor authentication to make changes, stuff like that too, I imagine, are kind of all in the stack. I guess Daniel likes to keep all of his passwords in a text file on his desktop. But yeah, and this is, I'm kind of bummed that John Cesario is not here, because if I remember correctly, I think Square actually has this really cool piece of software they wrote that holds passwords kind of in an in-memory daemon that you can query to get the password out of, or it might have been something like it does a virtual mount on the individual host that needs access to them. And so otherwise, the passwords are effectively locked down on the machines until they're unlocked by either an operator or some other medium, I think.
Yeah, we have something that we use for storing other secrets elsewhere at Yelp, but the MySQL database passwords, especially for the users who have a limited set of access, we do store some hashes just directly in Puppet. And then for like the other passwords, we have them somewhere else.
Okay. So there was another question about tracking schema changes. I think Shlomi, you had brought that up. Do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, so that's recurring throughout some companies I've worked with. Someone dropped that column. What happened? How did that happen? Do you have any way to audit that? What do you do? What are your preferred solutions? So two approaches that I've seen is one to be able to audit before action any such statement, possibly intercept it and block it, or use two-phase authorization, like you would need someone else to click approve to make that through. And anyway, that would be audited because you issued that query. And the other method I'm familiar with is to just compare or once a while, once a day, once an hour, whatever. Look here and do the diff and say, okay, that's the change. That has changed. So at least you know what has changed and roughly when that happened. So how do you do it?
Never allow people to drop columns. Revoke the drop privilege from your migrator user.
Right. How about changing a column from UDF-8 to UDF-8 MB4 or stuff like that? Any change that...
Shlomi, we do not need emoji poops stored in our databases. So that's obviously the answer to that.
Yes, you do, actually.
I mean, it's a very valid point, and actually, if someone else wants to chime in before I do.
Yeah, I think another related thing is that if you use a MySQL dump without the data, then there are still differences, like the auto increment ID. So it's quite difficult to create a diff between those. So I was wondering if people have any nice ways of doing that.
Well, so,
go ahead.
Thanks. I was just going to say, so we have a pretty rigorous process around schema change approval. You know, if someone's making a schema change, it's just like they were pushing code.
No, did Jenny freeze again?
No, I still see myself.
I do see it.
Oh, okay. So I'm just going to keep talking, assuming you can see me. So we have a process around schema changes that go through a review board, and there's a limited set of people who authenticate as themselves when they run these schema changes. And part of our process is we always do backwards compatible rolling forward schema changes. So columns are not dropped until columns are not dropped until they're completely unused by the code. There's always the possibility of a bad actor, but this is a limit. This is limited to a set of users who we trust.
Yeah, and we have a couple things. We use Monyog. I don't know if anybody's used that before, but we use that to kind of look over, oh, did something change? Not so much who changed it, and it basically tracks all changes, and it works pretty good. And then in general, all our DDL changes are initiated via developers, and so it goes through the whole process where there's a git commit and a review, and then it's submitted out, so we can kind of look back that way. That doesn't capture the I went around the process changes though, so that's sort of where our holes are.
We're also, our plans in the future to automate our schema change using something like, I'm experimenting with Liquibase right now, and of course I'll report back to the group with what I end up implementing. But in our future, we hope that all database schema changes will actually be made by a Jenkins user implementing Liquibase, and that would mean that we would then be able to remove the access for a large majority of users, continuing to ratchet down security.
Yeah, and I think for us, like, our migration process still has a pretty heavy manual aspect that it's, on the roadmap to improve that, obviously. But, I mean, very similar to what Jenny was saying, for the most part, we kind of stay away from the destructive migrations. Modifies are kind of up in the air, but typically, especially something like dropping a table, we do allow table drops to happen, but it has to be removed from code. We verified in our monitoring system that there's no reads, writes, or any sort of access to the table happening for a period of like a couple weeks, I think. The table was first renamed to a version, a different name, so that in case we need to put it back, we still can. And again, you kind of let that sit for another couple weeks or so, and then eventually you can destroy it. And so I think another interesting follow-up here was, because this is actually something that came in for me recently, is, well, what about we have a field that we want to drop a column from a table because it has sensitive data that we do not want in the table anymore. I'd like to actually, do other folks have a kind of a plan of action for something like that?
like removing that data from backups after the fact, or what are you getting at?
I'd say, I guess, don't worry about the backup part of it, maybe, because those are handled separately. But like in your active schema, like you have some obligation to remove. I mean, maybe you didn't have a password encryption scheme in place or something, or something like that. And you need to kill just a field that has a bunch of data in it, or you've migrated data to an encrypted version, and you need to remove the original. Man,
I think we would go through our normal process to. Stop using the column, rename it out of the way, and then drop it from the database. We have in the past had to go back and remove access to backups, but that's a complicated thing that everyone needs to think very hard first and come up with a thing that works for them.
Yeah, and I was going to say, in our case, it's probably a matter of we'll run through our application script framework to actually delete those records out of there, which will automatically store a rollback. So if anything goes wrong, they can reinstate those fields, and then, yeah, do the normal rotation, remove action. But yeah, and I think the question of like, well, you need to remove it from your backups, that's like, encrypt your backups, then who cares? So, okay, I'm trying to think what our next talking point was. I think someone else had a question.
I was curious about the MySQL upgrade process that people take, specifically, as companies become more security focused, and as it becomes more important sometimes to upgrade MySQL within a reasonable time frame due to security alerts. I'm just curious what different people's upgrade process are, and I can either start or I can go last.
So I'll start because this has been going on for long in Booking.com and has been recently much improved. So for all our replication topologies, we have pools, and we know what the capacity of each pool should be. And so we know how many slaves we can take down from each topology or in each pool so as to upgrade them. And we have this automated process that we just go and say, we have a task. The task could be an upgrade, or it could be a backup, or whatever. And given that the task is an upgrade, it will just iterate all our servers, and that's a handful of them. And one by one check, am I able to do that maintenance on you right now? If it would need to take it off the pool, not be eligible to go under that maintenance at that time. And the process will just repeat and try again, like every hour for every server that was unavailable at the time for the upgrade process. And so this is really incremental, and it works pretty nicely. I think today it is at the point of, okay, let's just throw it at a few hundred servers and go to sleep, and we'll wake up in the morning, and hopefully this will be behind us. Go ahead.
We've got our approach, I'm not sure if the question was kind of aimed at how to automate it or at the policy of when you actually do the upgrades. I mean, we've got kind of a conflict that with the number of database servers we have, rolling out an upgrade is potentially so impactful that we would like to minimize it. So, and I would love to have MySQL upgrades that are just security fixes. Unfortunately, they're not, which means that every upgrade you really need to analyze whether or not it impacts your performance. We're in the process of actually upgrading a version that fixes a bug which makes a certain setting that we have in place actually work. Not sure why we had the setting originally, but it didn't work. Now, if it starts working in the new version, it will actually kill performance. So as part of that upgrade, we have to make sure that setting gets rolled back. That type of stuff makes us really careful about what we roll out. We got the security people on one side saying, hey, you need to follow the security briefs, and every quarter at least we need to upgrade to the new version. If you got to upgrade several thousand servers, not that easy. You need to do a lot of analysis before you actually can roll that out. And that's not even talking about going to major releases. So it's something that we're struggling with, and hopefully by increasing the speed of actually being able to roll stuff out, having multiple rollouts going on at the same time, we'll be able to handle that. But for us, it's a work in progress.
You really hit upon something that I was curious about. For us, we have a rollout process. Is painful but could be improved upon. But there's also the testing and proving of a version that you want to use, both for actually does it work, but then also for performance. So do you have any automation in place that rolls a new version into your unit testing framework or performance testing?
We don't do that yet. It's part of the things that we're actually actively working on, but we don't have the tooling for that yet. Anybody else?
In our case, so our dev environment's usually obviously the first thing we'll probably throw the upgrade at, just to kind of let it bake, see how it goes, see what it looks like. And it could be something as simple as just upgrading a replica potentially. But we also, so that's obviously the first big step. Make sure your code just straight up doesn't break against a new version for whatever reason. When you upgrade to MySQL 5.5 or 5.6 the first time, usually strict mode is the first thing that's enabled by default that you have to go and turn off again. Things like that. But I think once you get through that thing, and for us, I think it's obvious, we're still going through getting the process very well understood to the point that it's actually, we could probably start automating it at this point now. But from the testing perspective, we sample traffic on all of our production servers very regularly, and we actually store a copy of the sampled slow logs that captures everything during the time interval. And so we grab a bunch of those from each individual sets of clusters that we're going to upgrade, run them through, I think, PT log player with some level of concurrency, probably 64 or 128 threads, and just kind of let that run against a new a copy of the data set on a new version of MySQL. And the big thing is we kind of capture slow query log against that and check, is there any noticeable query performance regressions or something like that? Did the top bad query change on the new version? And is that change because a query that worked very well on, let's say, 5.5 does not work as well on 5.6? Was there a hint that we needed for an earlier version that doesn't work as well for an older or a newer version, and things like that? And then once that's all kind of done, then throw it into maybe a customer read-only replica path. Just kind of let it sit there, see how it handles, and eventually make it a master and let it roll. Oh, and something about PT log player being deprecated. I forgot about that.
Yeah, I forget what PT log player is being replaced with, but I find it unusable.
PT playback, wasn't it?
Yeah, I don't know how to get that thing to work. No,
it doesn't use the logs that you would expect it to either.
So we do something very similar. So we roll out, a new version first to, individual sandboxes, run unit tests, then deploy to a couple test hosts at a time. We don't have a very sophisticated PT log player framework so that we can do a lot of really representative testing against an upgraded version, but we're getting there. Eventually at some point you just have to roll it out to a replica in production and see how it fares compared to its buddies.
Yeah, I think we don't have a real fan-out architecture. Most of our applications are pairs of masters, and pretty much it's mostly write as far as heavy throughput. So we tend to pick a service that is low use or less risk and start there, especially if it's a major upgrade, like when we went from 5.5 to 5.6, and try to catch all the, this new default messed us up really bad. That's usually where we get bad, is if we missed a default or a config that changed. And then we roll it out. We don't have as easy of a way to do the sort of automated things because each of the services we do are so different. And so it would be nice to have something that was more automated, but usually we'll just do the slaves. make sure everything works there for a while. Obviously, staging, but we tend to push changes really fast. And so then we'll just take our smaller systems, see how they do performance-wise, and then eventually do our big ones. It's not the greatest, I don't think. I'd love to have a performance environment and do that kind of stuff too.
Yeah, just thinking, and I mean, the other thing that I forgot to mention is, this whole idea of like, oh, maybe you'll put in, if you're going 5.5 to 5.6, you'll put 5.6 in as a passive read-only replica, maybe make it a passive or a master as well. But that also, assumes that you verified you can have a new major version replicate to an old major version without any, noticeable problems. I remember we hit some interesting gotchas like. I think it was like binlog checksums or something in 5.6, broke replication down to a 5.5 machine. So we had to, found those, change all those variables to make sure everything's still happy. And it's one of those things like, upgrade manuals typically say do not replicate from newer to older. Mm-hmm. And you're like, yes, you're right, but I have a business to run, and unless I'm going to write a custom replicator.
Right. There's two things that have to change. The binlog event version and the checksum. But it is possible-ish.
Like, I'm actually curious, like, what's going to be the next big gotcha when you're upgrading from 5.6 to 5.7, and specifically because there are all those different minor versions of 5.6 that are kind of incompatible in their own ways. And it's going to be one of those, like, make sure you're on 5.6.5 first, and then.
Well, and GTID was the, I was like, oh, we'll just enable this, and that didn't work great the first time, So I think it takes, on the big versions, it takes a little more research than we might typically think if you want to check out all the new features.
Yeah, and that's the other one, is wanting to turn on some of those new switches, messing around with the new things that are available. But anyways, I just realized we're actually out of time. We really blew through this stuff today, so we've got about 3 minutes left, so just a super quick soliciting any thoughts or ideas for topics for next time that folks would be interested in.
I'm always down to talk about schema, change management, more in-depth tools, what people use, the process.
Maybe Jenny can lead that conversation the next time. I had some stuff about compliance today. We kind of touched on it throughout, but didn't explicitly call it out as separate. So that's something else we could just kind of maybe mention in passing next time, what kind of compliance requirements are there that people have to deal with. What else?
I care a lot about automation, and I find it really interesting to, know regardless as to whether people are using Puppet, Chef, or whatever, it's really good to know what, it's really interesting to see what other people are using and what they've done to automate these things, because it kind of does boil down, because compliance is a factor there. You can only be as compliant as you have the bandwidth to do, and making robots do your job for you is a big part of that.
Well, and piggybacking on that, seeing how people have broached from sort of the orchestration versus configuration, like Chef is awesome at configuration management automation, but then when you're talking about orchestration, do this, then this, then this, and don't do that if this happened. Because we're doing a lot of Chef work right now, and it's not so straightforward.
So that'll be things like, you can use Chef or Puppet to bootstrap, your MySQL or your environment, but then the next step is, well, you need to hook it up, you need to get a data set on it, you need to hook it up to your application, kind of put it here and there, and so kind of that workflow setup.
Yeah, the workflow piece that isn't always so straightforward.
Okay. I have 1 more minute. Any other thoughts or suggestions for topics? Okay, feeling kind of dry. All right, so I'll see if other things come up while in the next 2 weeks, and I guess that's kind of it. So thanks very much for coming today, everybody, and we'll see y'all in 2 weeks, I believe.
Thank you, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah.
Thanks.